So welcome to Module 3 for BAAS 3020 at University of North Texas. We're looking at the issues in inquiry design today. I thought I'd post this. This is a little bit old photograph of myself about a decade ago. This is my last PR shot, headshot, when I was the Chief Marketing Officer at European Computer Telecoms in Munich, Germany. So what are we doing today in Module 3? These are our materials. Your reading is from the textbook 100 Questions, numbers 33 through 42. It's a very short reading and quite informative. We're also going to start some reading in 52 Things about customer analytics. Again, a very short reading. This one's a kind of a fun one. I'm using Jerry Maguire and Show Me the Money. Then we have a number of resources that are in Canvas. Just page through these, read through them, take good notes. The glossary of inquiry design, the relationship between variables, how to ask better questions, questions and hypothesis. There's also a video that follows this. You don't want to miss it. It's a great short video, questions versus hypothesis. And then some additional reading and another really good video on questions in the additional materials. For this module, you have a Module 3 quiz, which is based on all of the things you see above there, all of the materials. And then remember that you have your first discussion this week, and the leader post needs to be up by Monday evening. Okay, so hopefully you've seen this module, or you've already posted that if you are the leader for the week. So our first text reading is from 100 Questions About Survey Research from Aaron Ruel. This is a really nice and handy book. It should help you a lot with your survey project and going deeper and understanding the research method. These are very simple to read. Most of them are about a page. They're very focused on one question and answer. And they use really good examples. So let's go through some of the questions for today. What is involved in writing good survey questions? Remember that each question is attempting to measure something at the theoretical construct that we've come up with, and the responses are the observations we're going to make. Okay, we have to remember that everyone has to answer the exact same question, so the level has to be consistent, whether someone has low level of education to higher level of education. There's some more things in here that you want to look at. Again, remember that this lecture video is not a substitute for you reading the material. I do not go to the depth that you will get from actually going through the material. How do we connect a theoretical concept to a survey question? The first step is to explore and understand exactly what it means by the concept. Okay? So you should be doing some research on the area that you're focusing on, and kind of understanding it from like a 360-degree perspective. And this is what we call conceptualizing. And then you actually write survey questions that will capture the essence of what you want to know, and that is called operationalizing the concept. How do we write survey questions for complex theoretical concepts? This is difficult. Some concepts are large and complex, involving multiple dimensions. Sometimes these require very in-depth surveys. The example used in the question is if the concept or construct is depression, there's a battery or survey that's used that includes 20 different survey questions. So these are really a struggle. I don't think we'll be getting into them in this course. In fact, you shouldn't be picking out anything that's exceptionally complex. You can push yourselves, but do not pick something that far out. Sometimes we have multiple concepts, and the breakdown is complex as well. One of the most important tasks is to conceptualize the concepts found in the research question in order to ensure the survey question can be used to correctly answer the research question. Okay, so again, it's all about conceptualizing and then making sure your questions will give you what you want. Do we need to create new questions or can we use existing questions? If there are existing questions that have been shown to provide good results, it makes sense to use those. Okay. This also allows you to compare with other research, etc. It talks in here about how you would determine if they were good or not. And then also thinking about some parameters. For example, you're going to be surveying your classmates, which might be different than a survey of children. Okay. What are the basic rules to writing good survey questions? It talks about that it's a science and it's an art. So it's a skill that you can build, a gift that you can have. And the problem is that most people think they can write a good survey question without ever going through the kind of learning that you're doing. They think, oh, this is easy. I just want to know if people like Coke or Pepsi. Well, maybe in that sense, that's one thing, but why or how, etc. So really understanding, conceptualizing the concept, and maybe even who your client is. We talked about show you the money. What are you trying to achieve with your survey? Okay. Remember again, you need to keep the language simple. I recommend this for all communications, especially workplace communications, that you write at a lower level. This says grade 9 or below. I usually say grade 5 or 6. Use simple, clear, precise language. Avoid abstract terms. Only one question is in a question. No double-barreled questions. Avoid negative questions. They're harder to understand, and certainly avoid double negatives. Again, there's more in here than what I've spoken to. Are there more advanced rules to writing survey questions? Of course there are. Here it talks about bias, and definitely go ahead and read through this. It's interesting that people are more likely to try to give the answer they think the survey person wants to hear, so you have to be careful of the language you use, bias you use, be careful about jargon, stay in the present tense. If you do need to ask questions about the past, try not to go too far back, and again, don't ask two questions in the same question. Make it two separate questions. What are the best response options to use with surveys? There are two types of responses, open responses and closed-end. Closed-ends are where you just, there's a list. A multiple choice is a closed-end survey question. You have a number of options to choose from. Open-end is just where you have a blank to fill out. The thing here is about how it is thinking more about tabulating the data, measuring the data. So open-ended can be very difficult. Some open-ended are fine, like how old are you? That's a simple number you would input. But other kind of open-ended, you have to be careful because they may be opinion-based, etc., and they may be hard to draw conclusions from that don't impact or that aren't impacted, or our research isn't impacted by our own sense of bias and history. What is the measurement level of a survey question and why is this important? There are 4 levels of measurement: ratio, interval, ordinal, and nominal. This does a good high level, and there's some actually good points here. But when creating survey questions, pay attention to what the measurement level is and try for response categories that allow ratio and interval measurement when at all possible. And I'm going to leave it there for now because later on in this presentation you'll have more in depth about those levels. When are open-ended questions used in survey research? Open-ended questions are important in several situations. When asking about a quantity, like how old you are, how many drinks do you have a week. Often they also follow a closed-end question to expand upon the closed-end response. And when the concept being observed is new and so potential responses are not yet known. It says when creating open-ended survey questions that require text responses, try to ask questions that require long responses. Do not ask for a yes or no. Save this type of question for when you really when you really truly do not know what answers you'll get. In general, use them very sparingly. How do we order the survey questions? Think about the person taking the survey. What makes sense to them? What is a logical flow? What is the least burdensome? You don't want to ask people about breakfast and then about their car and then back to breakfast and then about something else. So try to create some kind of flow, make it easy for the person to take the survey, That'll make it more enjoyable. They'll be more likely to answer honestly. Start the survey with instructions and remind the respondents that their identity is confidential. Put sensitive questions. Don't start out with something that may shock people. Put sensitive questions closer to the middle so that you build up some rapport before they answer. End the survey on a positive note. Make sure it looks professional, etc. So our next textbook for this module that our readings are from 52 Things, talking about customer analytics, and this is our first readings from here. In survey after survey, CEOs and CMOs cite the relative ineffectiveness of research and analytics, bringing the voice of the customer to business decisions. And so we do a lot of research, but that research may not actually kind of translate. And that's kind of what the focus of this book is. We're going to look at section 1, the first 5 things about customer analytics, customer research, customer information that we're trying to pull together and get insight into, which is really what you're doing again in your projects. It's not just figuring out good questions, which of course is a key component of this, but then doing the process, collecting the information, and then gathering valuable insight. Okay. So this first one talked about people don't want to buy a 1/4-inch drill. They want to make a 1/4-inch hole, which is kind of interesting, you know, right? The company that sells the drills is focused on the drill, how it's easy to hold, how fast it works, how long the battery lasts. But in some sense, we've lost sight of what the actual need is, and the need is to create a hole. And so his first comment is to focus on the whole. What is it that the customer needs? What is it that the customer is trying to do? And throughout this. And he gives a great example in here about working with a university that was trying to figure out how could they identify students that were not likely to graduate in 4 years. And so they had all these studies and data they were pulling together, but it really wasn't providing them any great insight. And so, you know, from a common sense perspective, they said, well, wait, let's look at, if it takes 120 credits to graduate, let's look at people after 2 years and see anyone that's below 60. You know, they're already slowing down. And so it was a really simple way to identify people instead of trying to find all these analytics about commute time, etc. So focusing on what is the real need here from the customer perspective, and then, you know, not so much let's just pull up a lot of data, but really kind of thinking through, you know, clever ways and thoughtful ways to find out that information that we're seeking. The second one was St. Jerry Maguire. Spend your energy on the results that matter. Okay? And here he's just talking about show me the money. I mean, the basic point of customer analytics is to make money, to increase our revenue, etc. So really our projects we need to focus on, you know, specifically at customer analytics, if they're not, you know, impacting the bottom line, then they may not be worth the effort. Okay. Now the bottom line might be different for different people. Like, for example, if you were doing a research project for the police department right now, it might be more on improving the reputation, you know, or etc. And so that would be a different thing, but that is still improving the bottom line. And also that's not a for-profit company. Reduce uncertainty that matters. Okay, answer the hard questions that count and punt on the easy or irrelevant ones. And this is a great section. Take some time in here. I think this is a great life lesson. In fact, I love the model on page 8 here, where it does this uncertainty and value framework, if you will. And so if you have great uncertainty and also great value, that's where you want to apply the research. You know, he's talking about if you're pretty certain what's going to happen and it's not a big impact financially, then make a judgment call. And if it's not right, then adjust your judgment call. But if you're really unsure what's going to happen and it's a lot of money on the line, that's where you really want to do your analysis and research. It's a great section, and that little chart, I think, makes things really clear. How do we show the money? Okay. To show the money, you need to understand the 4 levers that increase profits. Capture share from competitors. This is the Pepsi versus Coke kind of saga he talks about. Capture surplus from customers. Consumer surplus is the idea that people are willing to spend more on an item than they charge. So, for example, if maybe a lot more people thought an iPhone was worth $2,000, well, maybe iPhone could raise the price from $600 to $800 and gain some more money. Grow the size of the market. This is where you try to, add features or do something that's going to make more people want your device or service, and then reduce costs without reducing value. So these are the 4 different ways to create value. He talks in here about doing things dynamically, recognizing that when you make an adjustment, your competition may do the same. And he also gives a great example with the Xbox. Read through that example. It's kind of a fun one, where they totally misread the market. And he says, understand what job the consumer is hiring the product to do. Again, we're going back to the first one, show me the whole. And they totally missed it when they tried to launch the Xbox, I think, in Korea. The last one from this is don't let the client off the hook. If a client doesn't share the ultimate business purpose of a piece of research or their hypothesis, push them to do so. It is critical to shaping good output. And my background is I was the chief marketing officer for European Computer Telecoms. And, when you're doing communications, whether that be a marketing piece, more specifically a marketing piece, but even to when you're doing informational sharing, the first question you always ask yourself is, what do I want the reader or the audience to do? Do I want them to buy my product? Do I want them to be more informed about it? Do I want them to share that information with someone else because it's so exciting, etc.? So you always ask, why am I doing this? What am I trying to get to? What do I want someone to do? And that's this point about don't let the client off the hook. You have to know what is the issue and what is the target, if you will, for analytics. Our first Canvas reading and material is another glossary, inquiry design. It's not very long. There's, I think, about 10 different words in here. I think most of them are pretty intuitive, so they'll make sense to you. Again, take some notes, use a highlighter. Well, I guess if you're on your computer, it might be difficult to use a highlighter, but take some notes and write some things down so that you understand them, but also that it will retain you. This stuff is really important when you're formulating these survey questions, etc., and doing your whole survey project. So make sure you go through this list carefully, and again, take some good notes on it, especially the things that are instructive and how to create better questions, etc. Our next reading in Canvas is relationships between variables, and it first starts talking about positive, negative, and non-directional correlation. Positive, these are again very intuitive. If the independent variable goes up and the dependent goes up, that this is called a positive correlation because they're both going in the same direction. Negative is just the opposite. As the independent rises, the dependent falls. And non-directional is kind of when you don't know what's going to happen. You think that there's some relationship, you think there's going to be some impact, but you're not really sure on the front end. We look at what confounding variables are. This is an interesting thing about where we pick a variable and we do see a relationship, but it may not be the right variable. And there's some good examples in there about thinking through, is this the right variable that's actually causing something, or is there something else, a confounding variable that might be the actual cause, or do you have the confounding variable that's not really it? Causality, again, we talk about the difficulty in in defining and proving a relationship of one thing causing another, how to write a good hypothesis. You're going to need this, so take your time with this. It's not very long. None of these Canvas things are very long. But how to write a hypothesis and then writing qualitative questions to indeed prove your hypothesis. Formulating your hypothesis or So we have two videos in our next Canvas section on how to ask better questions. And the first one is a TED Talk from Mike Vaughn. And the second is an interview with Dr. Clayton here locally at University of North Texas. And so Mike talks about how most of our training, most of our education focuses on what to think, on known knowledge. But we also need to know how to think. And to emphasize this, he points out that often when people are given a lot of research or data, their decisions actually become worse because that they're often guessing. And he suggests that when they did some, kind of their own research to figure out how do they help people move from basic questioning to good questioning, they tried a lot of things and it really wasn't helping them, and so they decided to look at top performers to see what they did. And he talked about how they asked good questions, and that while most questions focus on known knowledge, good questions go beyond what is known to what is possible, and that also the words that are used can determine if it's a good or bad question, and that the emotional framing that we use with the question can either limit us or it can kind of help us to expand our knowledge. Make sure you look at the video interview with Dr. Clayton. I think that will answer the idea about why is he making us do this? Why is there so much information? I think this will give you some context, some real life context for our survey project, etc. Next, we have a short reading about how questions and hypotheses are related to each other and how to form a hypothesis based upon some information you want, and then how that hypothesis might drive the questions that you create. There's some great examples in this reading. Make sure you take your time. Again, it's only about a page long. It's probably about 5 minutes of reading. But pay, again, specific attention to the different types of questions you can ask based upon some hypothesis that you have. I think, again, this will help you shape some of your own questions and your project work. The last materials that we're covering in this module are a couple of different pieces about asking good questions. There's a link to some sample questions for research questions. Don't miss this short video either. 3 steps to write a good research question. It's very short. It's very simple, but I think it will also kind of pull all this information together. And then there's some more resources here for independent versus dependent variables that you can delve down into if you're still having some confusion about these pieces. Okay?